The uniform crest actually resembled a uterus. Very closely. A little too closely, maybe. Hey hockey fans, welcome back to part 2 of this series. In this series, I'm going to start with Buffalo, who I actually left out on accident. Sorry to all you Buffalo fans, it really was an accident, I promise. I mean, I might have a few hard feelings toward Bylsma, but they don't deserve it, sorry. So I'm going to start with Buffalo and 5 facts that I have for them. The team was actually established in 1970 following the league's expansion along with the Vancouver Canucks. Fact number 2, team was actually wanting a name other than the generic Bison, which teams in Buffalo had been called for years. The Knoxes, who were actually the team owners at that time, commissioned a voting process which took place, and few interesting names came about, with names like Mugwumps, Buzzing Bees, Flying Zeppelins being entered into the winning choices. Sabres was the one that actually won, obviously, because Seymour Knox actually felt like it would symbolize a saber, which is a weapon that's carried by a leader and could be effective on offense or defense. Number 3, I found this rather interesting, but in the same year as the NHL amateur draft, the selection involving who would get the first round pick between, remember, Vancouver was also in this expansion as well, involved a roulette wheel. Can anyone say Vegas? So obviously whoever spun this would get first pick. And luckily enough, Buffalo was the winner. And they scored Gilbert Perreault. It's obviously a French name, so if I got that wrong, I apologize, all you Canadian people who may be watching. Speaking of that guy, he was actually part of the best known line in team history, which was known as the French Connection, because it was composed of 3 French-Canadian players: Perreault, Rick Martin, and René Robert. All 3 players have actually had their sweaters retired, and there was even a statue erected in their honor in 2012. Last fact for the Sabres. In May of 2002, John Riga and his sons actually were indicted for bank, wire, and security fraud, embezzling more than $2 billion from Adelphia. Rigas was later convicted and is currently appealing his sentence of 15 years in prison. So, the league obviously took control of the team, but the Rigas family remained owners on paper for a little bit longer. Okay, we're back on the right track now. In 1996, Colorado Avalanche met the Detroit Red Wings in the Western Conference Final and upset the Red Wings 4-2. During Game 6, Red Wings player Chris Draper was checked into the boards face first by Claude Lemieux. Draper actually had to undergo facial reconstructive surgery to help with his, shattered jaw, and also had to have his jaw wired shut at one point, so the incident actually marked the start of a huge rivalry, which is often considered one of the most intense in the NHL at this time by press and fans, all because of this incident, which is pretty understandable, I guess. The Avalanche are actually the only team in their division to not be in the Central Time Zone. Since Colorado is outside of it, it would actually be 1 hour ahead, so they're the only NHL team of their kind, because they're in the Mountain Time Zone instead of the Central. Fact number 3, team recently set a record, but it's not a very good one. Avalanche actually closed out last season with a 22-56-4 record, which was the worst in the NHL since the Atlanta Thrashers in their 1999 and 2000 season. The team's alternate jersey actually features an insignia on the front, which is actually taken from the Colorado state flag and recolored to match the team's color scheme. In the team's first season in Denver, the Avalanche won the Pacific Division and actually went on to sweep the Florida Panthers in the 1996 Stanley Cup Finals. Now, it might be a little bit hard to believe that they actually won a Stanley Cup considering how they're doing right now, but they have. And they actually became the first NHL team to win a Stanley Cup in their first season after a relocation. Only the NFL's Washington Redskins have been able to accomplish such a feat. And, notably enough, this was the first professional team that was based in Denver that would bring home a championship. Next on the list is Columbus. Prior to the start in the 2007-2008 season, the Blue Jackets organization actually bought a handmade replica cannon that was Napoleon style for the Nationwide Arena. And cannon actually goes off 3 different times. 1, when the Blue Jackets take the ice at the start of the game. 2, when they score a goal. And 3rd, whenever they win a game. Second fact, besides their mascot Stinger, the team also had another mascot at one point, an anthropomorphic cannon named Boomer. But he only lasted for half of the 2010-2011 season, and I guess you know why. Because a cannon as a mascot's kind of weird, and Stinger just makes more sense. Fact number 3. In Columbus, the Blue Jackets actually replaced the Columbus Chill of the ECHL, who played in the city from 1991 to 1999. Later in 2000, Blue Jackets along with the Minnesota Wild actually took place in the 2000 NHL expansion draft. Despite the fact that the team has yet to win many awards, they actually set a pretty good record last season. The team had a 14-0 record in December. The win streak actually happens to be the second longest in NHL history, behind the Pittsburgh Penguins from the season of 1992 to 1993, when the Pens won 17 consecutive games. And down to the last fact, the Jackets actually got their name from the Blue Jackets that symbolized the Union side of the Civil War. Alright, going down south a little bit to Dallas. First fact, this team has actually had their own fair share of locations and names over the years, starting with the Minnesota North Stars in 1967, and then they moved to Ohio to merge with the Cleveland Barons. Ultimately, the team relocated for its final time in the 1992-93 season to Dallas, Texas, where they remain today. Once they arrived in Dallas, the team actually made minor adjustments to their original jerseys, paying tribute to their days as Minnesota Stars. But from there, they actually went through a various slew of different jerseys, and some of them were, should I say, interesting. I think this is probably one of my favorite facts in this whole series, so you might find it interesting as well. The Stars actually introduced a jersey in the 2003-2004 season that proved to be embarrassing to both fans and critics. Why, you say? Why was this so embarrassing? The uniform was black, red, and green. It featured a modern representation of the constellation Taurus, if you're not familiar with horoscopes, but fans and critics both realized something. The uniform crest actually resembled a uterus. Very closely. A little too closely, maybe. So, in result, fans gave it a nice little nickname. Ready for it? Mooterus. Get it? Okay, got that out of my system. And this uniform was gone by the 2005-2006 season, and plenty of fans are probably rejoicing at this point. Moving on to fact number 3. After winning the Stanley Cup in 1999, the Dallas Stars became the first team that was actually based in a subtropical city to win a Stanley Cup. Fact number 4. The Stars have actually hosted a game consecutively on New Year's Eve since 1997. And the last fact is, upon their initial relocation to Dallas, the Stars played out of Reunion Arena, which was one of the worst NHL arenas at the time because of its horrible ice surface. But the team moved less than 1.5 miles to the American Airlines Center in 2001. Next on the list is Detroit. Every time I hear Detroit, I always want to think of that Eminem song, Welcome to Detroit. I used to be obsessed with Eminem. Moving on. As of 2016, the Red Wings had won the most championships out of any team in the NHL in the United States, and are 3rd overall in the NHL as far as total championships go, behind the Montreal Canadiens and Toronto. Fact number 2. The year of 1952 actually featured the start of a very interesting tradition that you may find weird if you're not from Detroit or a Wings fan: the octopus throw. The owner of a local fish market, Peter Cusimano, actually threw one from the stands. The Red Wings went on to sweep 2 of their opponents that year, and went on that year en route to a Stanley Cup championship. Fact number 3. The Red Wings have actually participated in the longest game in NHL history, during a playoff match facing the Montreal Maroons in 1936. The game lasted a total of 176 minutes and 30 seconds. This game actually took 6 overtime periods to finally settle, and the overtime goal wasn't scored until around 2:30 in the morning. Can you imagine being a fan in those stands? Fact number 4. The Red Wings captain at the time, Ted Lindsay, was actually the first player in the NHL to develop the Stanley Cup tradition, which involves a victory lap around the ice after winning the Stanley Cup. I found this fact particularly interesting. The Red Wings were actually the first team to ever participate in an outdoor game. And while that may sound mundane to start out with, the team that they actually versed was made up of prisoners. Yeah, the game took place in 1954, in which the Red Wings actually versed prison inmates from Michigan. On to Edmonton. The Oilers haven't always been called the Oilers. Actually, back when they were playing in the WHA before they merged with the NHL, they were actually called the Alberta Oilers. Fact number 2. The original 1972 design for the Oilers actually featured blue as the primary color and orange as the secondary color on the jerseys. But in later seasons, the colors were actually flip-flopped to where orange was the primary color and blue the secondary, as we know today. And just a little fun fact that I threw in there, for the first few games of the 1972 season, players actually did not have their last name on their jerseys as other NHL players did. Instead, the word Alberta was spread on the back in capital letters, in order to obviously symbolize that they were playing in Alberta. Fact number 3. After joining the NHL, the Oilers went on to win 5 Stanley Cups, and they're actually the only team besides the Pittsburgh Penguins tied for the most Stanley Cup championships that has joined the league in 1967 or after 1967. So 1967 or later, there are no other teams that have won 5 Stanley Cups as the Pens and the Oilers both have. Over the 40 years that the Oilers team has been in existence, they haven't really changed their logo. It's mainly stayed the same and pays tribute to oil country where the team is based, and if you look closely, it looks like the letters are actually kind of dripping oil down. However, this team released actually a monstrosity of a logo in the 2001 season, which was just an alternate logo, thank God. But anyway, it features a raining drop of oil that's surrounded with a sprocket of like metal. The logo lasted till 2007 until it was retired, but personally, I think it was for the best. And you may agree with me. Fact number 5. The Oilers mascot is actually a Canadian lynx, which is named Hunter. The choosing for the Canadian lynx was actually because Alberta happens to be the place of their largest natural habitat, and it was also because it got the largest vote overall. The name gives tribute to the original Oilers owner, William Wild Bill Hunter. Hunter wears the number 72 on his jersey to symbolize the year that the Oilers were actually founded.